everyone, Keto Comic here. It's Sunday, Bloody Sunday, back for another dose of the true crime we love. And this is the last of the three cases that I said were pivotal to me in my childhood. This is another one that happened long before I was born, and then again when I was maybe 3 years old, but it was resolved when I was like 13. So it's one that I remember vaguely, but it's still one that kind of creeped me out because it happened near my home. It happened in the small town of Anniston, Alabama, and I'll tell you more about that. But it's the case of Audrey Marie Hilley. It has enough intrigue and enough weirdness to write several books and several movies, and that has happened. So let's get into it. I call her the real-life serial mom. If you've ever seen that movie with Kathleen Turner, Serial Mom, where she acts like the perfect suburban wife and mother by day and is a serial killer by night. If you haven't seen it, check it out. It's awesome, and this story reminds me of that. So that. That's the reason I'm calling this real-life serial mom, Audrey Marie Hilley. Alright, Audrey Marie Hilley was born in the very small bedroom community of Anniston, Alabama, on June 4th, 1993, to Lucy and Huey Frazier, in 1933. They were a very blue-collar family. They were born in what they call the Blue Mountain areas of Anniston, which is a very blue-collar, rural, poor community, for lack of a better term. Anniston's a very old town in Alabama, northeast Alabama. It's near Jacksonville State University, one of the larger universities in the state, and it has a very blue-collar background and military background because for the longest time, Fort McClellan, one of the largest Army bases in the country, was housed there in Anniston. So a very strong military and blue-collar background there. A lot of mills and plants and things like that kind of indicative of the rural South, kept the community afloat. So it was very much a city of the haves and the have-nots. The middle class, if you could call them that, barely hung on to that title. So you were either really rich or working class, working poor. So it's that kind of city, and that's not unusual for Alabama. So it was into this type of environment that Audrey Marie Frazier was born on June 4th, 1933. Had a fairly common upbringing for that period of the South. Didn't really want for anything, but didn't have a lot of the finer things in life. So she really developed not a whole lot on her background, but what I can tell you from the books I read is that she started to envy the finer things in life. She wanted those things, and also she was very sweet acting, but could also be very cruel, like to she was very cruel to animals and things like that. Her mother even commented one time that she would never have another pet because of the way she treated them. So there were some signs, but at that point in time, especially in the rural South, to fairly uneducated people, they didn't really understand that could be the sign of future trouble, so it kind of went unnoticed and swept under the rug, so to speak. Well, after high school, she ended up marrying Frank Hilley in 1951, and just like her father, Frank earned a living in the factories and farms around Anniston, Alabama. Very blue-collar kind of guy. He did provide for Audrey. They had a small house in a slightly better neighborhood in Anniston, and he worked his way up from the factory line, to being a supervisor and eventually into the office at one of the plants, a plant manager. So a very well-paying job. And they did have 2 children. Mike and Carol Hilley, who play integral parts in this saga. But over the years, Audrey's spending got out of control. Now think of this idyllic 1950s, the wife stays home, the father works. Well, Frank was noticing that Audrey's spending on furniture, clothes, things like that were getting out of control, and they had a lot of fights about that. And so he basically told her, if you want to buy all these extra things, you need to help me, you need to go to work. And that was, we got to remember, this is the 1950s, early 60s. Women were just now starting to break into the workforce. This is just after Rosie the Riveter, where women had to go to work to keep the country going during World War II. So once the men came home from war, the women kind of went back to the household, and then you had the baby boom and that idyllic Eisenhower 1950s time. But then women were going into the workforce. If you haven't seen the show Mad Men, I highly recommend it. It kind of shows that slow transition between women staying home and women becoming more and more powerful in the workplace. It's a very, very good show, which is very idealistic of this time. And so she was just kind of appalled about, I have to go to work. And he's like, yeah, if you want to have all these extras that you're buying, you need to help me. You need to go to work. You can't just stay home. I can't afford all this. So she did. She was actually, from all accounts, a very talented executive secretary in a lot of ways. We'll get into that. But she started working for some of the more prominent lawyers and businessmen around town as a executive secretary, making a good salary for that time. Now, at home, things started to level off because Frank saw that she was bringing in money, but around 1969, 70, Frank started suffering from an unknown illness. And when I say unknown illness, it had very generic symptoms without a clear cause. He had nausea, headaches, abdominal pain, sore throat, fever, the kind of things that can basically be the symptom of anything. And their older son, Mike, started experiencing the same symptoms. So a lot of nausea, a lot of sickness. People didn't really know what was going on. There were early reports of children that came over to play with either Mike or Carol, their children, experiencing abdominal pain or vomiting or fever or chills after eating or drinking something at the Hilleys. I mean, it wasn't like really out there, but as being a suspicious situation, but some of the mothers around town noted that their children would sometimes come home from the Hilleys sick. So that was in the air, though no one really suspected anything. So you had this woman that had supposedly a sick child and a sick husband that was out there working secretarial jobs. So she basically framed that into a way to get more money, and that she would cry to her bosses, become emotionally connected with her bosses, eventually had affairs with most of her bosses, and they would pay her for services rendered, if you know what I mean. So Miss Hilley became, for lack of a better word, a high-class escort. And she kept this from Frank. Frank didn't know. Frank was all tied up with making a living, trying to keep up with Marie's spending, because she went by Marie, trying to keep up with Marie's spending. And then, of course, he was getting sick, so his mind was kind of preoccupied. It all kind of came to a head in 1975. But just prior to that, in 1972, their older son, Mike, who was experiencing the same kind of illness as his father, and they thought maybe it was some kind of genetic thing, though the doctor couldn't find anything, he left home and moved from Anniston to Atlanta, which is about an hour and a half away from Anniston, to become a minister. So he left and went to the Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary in Atlanta, and lo and behold, as soon as he left, within a week, his symptoms disappeared. And Mike, who was probably one of the smarter people in this family, realized that maybe something was going on at home, though he didn't connect it that it could be his mother doing it to him. Of course not. But he thought maybe there was something. I've seen interviews with him where maybe he thought maybe it was something like mold or something like that in the home that was causing people to get sick. because he said as soon as he moved to Atlanta, he got better. And then when he'd go home to visit, he would get sick. He noticed he would go home for the holidays or go home for weekends, and he would get sick before he left. And then he would get better when he was back in Atlanta. So it led him to believe that maybe there was something in the Hilley home that was causing severe allergic reactions. And he actually mentioned that to his father. And his father said, well, maybe that's something I need to look into, and actually ended up having the house inspected several times. This is before they knew asbestos and stuff like this was dangerous. But he really thought maybe there was mold or lead or something like that in the house that was causing the issue. And nothing ever turned up on an inspection, so that suspicion kind of got out the window. But Mike started having kind of issues with his mom anyway, so he decided to kind of stay away. Plus, he was getting married, and he ended up getting married and becoming a full-blown minister, and so he stayed in Atlanta, and his symptoms completely disappeared. Now, little sister Carol, who was about 4 years younger than Mike, had not yet started getting any symptoms. So this all came to a head, though, in 1975 when Frank came home early from work, nauseous and sick. He comes in, he walks into the bedroom and finds Marie in bed with her boss at the time. So he basically just screams, "Get up, get out of my house. I don't want to hear or speak of this ever again." So the man basically threw some money at Marie and ran out. All right. Marie begged Frank for forgiveness. At that point, Frank was too sick and too busy to even worry about it. So he told her, don't let it happen again, and we're fine. But of course things weren't fine. They were never really happy after that. Frank started going downhill really quick. This happened about February 1975. May 1975, Frank woke up in the middle of the night complaining with severe abdominal pain. He was having delusions delusions and hallucinations of past events and things like that, just kind of having a true psychotic episode. And they took him. Now, by this time, Frank's mother had also moved in with them, and she was starting to experience symptoms that she hadn't had before. She had dementia, but of course now she was starting to exhibit physical symptoms unrelated to dementia since she had moved in with the Hilleys. So you had that going on, and then Frank wakes up May 1975 with a severe psychotic episode, severe vomiting, severe abdominal pain, and they rush him to Anniston Memorial Hospital, where he dies suddenly. And the autopsy does not reveal anything except that he had various swollen internal organs. His kidneys had shut down, his liver had shut down, he was jaundiced, his stomach lining was inflamed. All these generic symptoms, that could have a million diseases attributed to him, but yet they couldn't find a cause for it. So he was basically ruled as dying from unknown causes related to an unknown illness, but organ failure was the official cause of death. So he was buried, and life kind of went on for the Hilleys, but Marie did receive about $31,000 in life insurance through Frank's company, and she went through that in short order. She moved them out of their working class neighborhood, working class house, to a larger house in a better neighborhood. She bought a brand new car. She bought fancy prom dresses and things like that for Carol. Now, Carol wasn't really interested in that because Carol was kind of a tomboy. In fact, Carol later came out as a homosexual. That didn't sit well with Marie because Marie was a very girly girl. She wanted Carol to wear dresses and dress up and be into fashion and makeup just like she was, but that didn't work. I had a similar incident with my mom. When your girl's a tomboy, she was definitely more like a son to her father than she ever was a daughter to her mother, if that makes sense. So there was a lot of conflict there, but Carol had not yet begun to get sick. So Mike came home a couple of times and asked Carol to move back to Atlanta to live with him and his wife. She refused. She said, Mom needs me, but if things get bad, I will come. So she also felt that her grandmother, who was still living with them, needed her help as well. Well, after the grandmother had a particularly bad episode, Frank's sister, Frida, decided it was probably better for her mother to come live with her. So the mom was gotten out of a very bad situation and went to live with her daughter. Now, because of the new car and the new house and new furniture and everything else you can think to spend $31,000, which is not a lot of money today. It was slightly better money in 1970, probably more the equivalent of $80,000 today, maybe. She went through that in short order, as well as she was still working secretarial jobs, but she started bouncing checks all over town. So she had a lot of her accounts closed, and so one bank kind of took pity on her and opened up all of her accounts there. She said she had a vacation home in Florida she was going to sell, so she'd be able to take care of it, so they floated her a loan to cover all her bad checks, but it just kept building and building and building, and so she was feeling a lot of financial pressure. Well, lo and behold, Carol started getting nauseous, having abdominal pains, vomiting, having psychotic episodes, had partial temporary blindness and deafness, all the same kind of mysterious symptoms that her father had. So, of course, Marie made a big show of taking Carol to the doctor, getting exams. They had the same findings as they did with Frank, which was a whole lot of nothing, just generic, undiagnosed symptoms. And Carol progressively got sicker and sicker and sicker. So fast forward to 1978. Shortly after Carol went to her senior prom, she collapsed at an after party and was taken to Anniston Memorial Hospital, where the doctors basically wanted to keep her for observation. Marie refused, had her discharged against medical advice back to her care, saying that she was going to take her to UAB, where people might know what they're doing. So Carol was discharged in her mother's care, and they took her immediately to the University of Alabama at Birmingham, which is about an hour and a half away, and brought her in. Well, while they were at the hospital, Marie was arrested for bad checks by the Anniston police. And to make things worse, the doctors at UAB is one of the, on the forefront of medical research. It still is. They started running various tests on her that the Anniston Hospital either didn't know to run or didn't have the facilities to run, to try to find out what was happening to this girl. Well, there was a young resident there that decided to had just read some books on mysterious illnesses and decided to take a look at Carol's fingernails. And he noticed some very strange brown lines coming through her fingertips, or through her fingernails. He realized immediately what it was a sign of arsenic poisoning. So he told them to get a nail and a hair sample and to measure the amount of arsenic in Carol's body. It was 100 times more than the normal levels of arsenic that are normally present in a human being. Now, one thing you have to know about arsenic poisoning, it's fairly undetectable. Unless you're actually looking for it, you won't find it because it mimics a million different diseases. And so you have to do actual testing to figure out that that's what's going on. So no one was looking for that because no one had any suspicions. So the doctor had a conversation with Carol asking her if she was trying to kill herself by taking arsenic, and she said no. So he figured out right away someone was trying to kill her. Because her mother, about 2 weeks before this episode happened, had taken out a $25,000 life insurance policy on Carol. So I think we start to see the connection there, right? So the Anniston police and Birmingham police wanted to question Carol. They forbade her mother to visit her, even though her mother had been bailed out of the bad check charges, had been bailed out of jail. They refused to let her mother see her. When Carol confessed to the doctor and the nurses at UAB that her mother had been giving her injections all along, both at home and in the hospital, saying they were from the doctor, after a thorough examination of her medical records, it was deduced that Marie was never instructed by any medical professional to give her daughter any type of injection. And when they went back, they decided to also investigate Frank Hilley's death. They exhumed his body. They tested for arsenic. They again found 100 times more arsenic than should be in it, and determined his cause of death was also arsenic poisoning. And after questioning Carol and Mike, they realized that Audrey Marie had also been giving Frank injections at home without specific advice from the doctor. So they arrested Marie again. Again, she was bailed out because she had a lot of dirt on a lot of rich men in Anniston. So somebody bailed her out of jail, and a break-in occurred at Marie Hilley's home, and a ransom note was left saying, I have her. If you want to get her back, follow the instructions that are coming. Okay, yeah. Nothing was missing from the house except some valuables like jewelry, silverware, clothes, and the family car. But Marie Hilley was gone. And this was about 1980-81. So for 2 long years, this investigation's been going on, and they're about to piece it together. Well, Carol was discharged into the care of her Aunt Frida, and there was constant police protection on her house because they didn't know what Marie Hilley was capable of. But Marie Hilley disappeared off the face of the earth. And this was an actual, authentic wanted poster that was put up. She was put on the FBI's top 10 most wanted. They were searching the 19 surrounding states around Alabama for suspected arsenic killing. And basically, Marie had pulled a disappearing act, disappeared into thin air. No one had a clue where she was. And so because the investigation was now in absentia, Marie was officially indicted December 1980 for poisoning on Frank Hilley and attempted poisoning on Carol. They never proved that they attempted to kill Mike because Mike had moved away and his symptoms stopped, and therefore the arsenic levels had dropped in his body. So they never could prove that she tried to kill Mike, but they were pretty sure, as well as the mother-in-law, Frank's mother, suspected she had also tried to kill her. And then they started wondering about all the children that used to complain about being sick after playing with Carol and Mike. So they exhumed one that had died in a car accident and did an autopsy on her body. Arsenic levels were slightly high, but nothing that would indicate that she had been poisoned. But everybody was pretty suspicious that Marie got her enjoyment from the suffering of others. This just wasn't... Money played a huge part in it, but it was obvious that Marie had psychopathic tendencies toward killing. It's kind of sadistic tendencies. So nationwide woman hunt, if you will, went on for Audrey Marie Hilley. But where was she? And this is where the story gets really interesting. All right. Marie had really no family left. Obviously her husband was dead. Her son had pretty much removed himself from her life a long time ago. Her sister-in-law, mother-in-law, and daughter want nothing to do with her. So she's basically, and her parents have long died, so she's basically just gone off the face of the earth. Well, a woman turned up in Florida in late 1980, early 1981, by the name of Robbie Hannon in the northern Florida area, and began dating a man named John Homan III, who was a blue-collar type of guy, but very successful. He had money. Robbie, who was Marie in disguise, she had lost a bunch of weight and had changed her hair color, basically sold him that she was the widow of an attorney in Georgia that had been killed along with their 2 children about 5 years before. And so John had had kind of a rough life, so they bonded. They met at a bar, they bonded, they began dating, and eventually legally married in late 1981. Now, somehow Marie had gotten a new Social Security card, a new ID, and was officially this Robbie Hannon. And she mentioned to Homan that she had never seen snow. So he said he had friends up in New Hampshire, Keene, New Hampshire, that had offered him a job up there, and if she wanted snow, they would move to New England. So they did. Late 1981, they moved to Keene, New Hampshire, where John worked and supported them well, but Robbie wanted more money, as Marie does, and began asking for a job, wanting to get a job. So their neighbors got her hired on at a manufacturing plant in Keene. Well, her Social Security card was only good in name, so to speak, because payroll started having some issues with getting her paid. Her Social Security card was kicking back, so Robbie was in a pickle. She either had to quit this job she had begged for and kind of ruin their social standing in Keene, or she had to find another way out of it. Well, suddenly Robbie, who had by this time had packed on about 50 pounds, started getting mysterious symptoms and being very sick. Well, toward the end of 1981, she confessed to John that she had a genetic illness and was probably dying, and that she needed to go back home to Texas, where she was originally from, to get treatment. And he said, okay, we'll go. And she said, no, I'm going to stay with my twin sister, Terry, who will take care of me. I don't want to interrupt our life here. I want our life here waiting on me when I get back. Please let me do this. I love you. Please let me do this. Okay. Holman agreed to make her happy, and she left Keene, flying to Dallas, Texas. And he sent her money. He helped support her while she was there. While she was there, Marie Hilley went on a diet and lost about 60 pounds, dyed her hair, made some other changes to her, and then called John Holman in early 1982, pretending to be her twin sister, Terry Martin, and saying that Robbie had died of her mysterious illness, and that her final wishes were for Terry to meet John and mutually console each other. So Terry flies into Keene, New Hampshire. John meets her at the airport. They hit it off a little too much and soon end up a couple. Now, this is something I've got to ask. If you've been married to somebody, you've been intimate with somebody, I don't care if you think this is their twin sibling. You can't tell me you didn't know that this was actually your former wife. I mean, I'm not buying that. Either John Holman's the stupidest man that ever walked the face of the earth, or he was just willingly ignored it because he was so infatuated with her. I don't know which it is. What do you think? Let me know below. But the thing of it is, her former employers or friends that she worked with, they weren't buying it. They really thought that this was Robbie, and they didn't know what was going on. So one of her former coworkers took a picture of Robbie and a picture of Terry that had been taken because they still ran in the same social circles, and sent it to a friend of hers that worked for the local police. He ran an all-points bulletin on it. I mean, I'm not sure how this appeals to privacy laws, but I guess things were just different in the early 80s. I'm sure they quite were. Realized that it matched the description of one Audrey Marie Hilley, who was wanted for attempt to poison in Alabama, and she was arrested. Terry Martin was arrested while shopping in Keene, New Hampshire, mid-1982, and extradited back to Alabama. Well, Holman, forever infatuated with her, didn't really care. He quit his job, and he followed her to Anniston, and she was incarcerated in the Julia Tutwiler prison for women while awaiting trial. He moved to Anniston to be near her because it's actually in Wetumpka, Alabama, which is not far from Anniston, about an hour's drive. So John Holman moved to Anniston to be closer to Marie. Well, in 1983, she was found guilty of murder of Frank Hilley, attempted murder on Carol Hilley, and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole at Julia Tutwiler Women's Prison in Wetumpka, Alabama. Well, there was some progressive policies going on with Alabama's prison system, and they would allow well-behaved prisoners that they felt were being rehabilitated to take weekend furloughs to visit with their family as a reward for good behavior. Well, Marie was used to playing the good suburban mom and did that in prison by teaching classes and just being a model prisoner, she was allowed to leave on a weekend furlough in mid-1987, about the fall time. And Whit Holman picked her up. He picked her up in a rental car, drove her back to Anniston, Alabama, to a very seedy motel because he had not had the best luck in Anniston finding employment and had lost his apartment, pretty much lost everything. So he was living in this very seedy, rundown motel. Marie was less than ecstatic about it, especially when he informed her that he had to return the rental car and he would be taking her back to prison on a motorcycle. So she wasn't too keen on that, let's say. But so Holman left her, which was stupid. You don't leave a furloughed prisoner alone. You need to keep them in your sight at all times. But he left her to return the rental car. When he came back to their hotel room, she was gone, and she had left him a note apologizing, but said she could not go back to prison. And so for 4 days, Audrey Marie Hilley was missing again. And John Holman went straight to the police, confessed what happened, and there was another nationwide woman hunt for this woman. So, I made a mistake. It was actually February 1987. She was paroled, so it was still the dead of winter. She disappeared. 4 days later, a woman that was living in the former home of her parents, Lucy and Huey Frazier, in that same rundown area of Anniston, Alabama, heard a frantic knock at their front door, went out, and they saw a woman acting very crazy, clutching her chest, talking to herself, begging for help because the temperature had dropped way below the 30s and it had been raining for several days. That lady called the police. The police tracked this woman down to the interstate where several cars had also called in reporting a woman that was acting very strangely along the side of the road. And they found a very cold, hypothermic Audrey Marie Hilley laying in grass next to the interstate there near Anniston, Alabama. She was taken to the same hospital where both her husband and her daughter were after she poisoned them, and she died the next day from cardiac arrest brought on by acute hypothermia. And thus ended the saga of the real-life serial mom, Audrey Marie Hilley. I hope you enjoyed that. This one was weird, and I just want to know what you think about John Holman. Was he willingly a participant, or was he just that stupid? And he died about 3 years after Audrey Marie in that same seedy motel. They don't know if it was foul play, or if he committed suicide, or he just died. But they said it was a robbery gone bad, but we don't know. It could have been somebody taking revenge. But anyway, everything about it was just seedy. But anyway, kind of a sad story. But Carol Hilley went on to live a full functional life. Mike Hilley as well. So I guess there was a sort of a happy ending to this one, but it was definitely a wild ride. So I hope you enjoyed this. I'll be back soon with another reaction. I really appreciate all the support I've been getting. I love you guys so much. Please share these. I want my true crime to really get out there. I love doing reactions, but true crime is my passion, and I would rather be known for that than reactions. I mean, I'm going to continue to do the reactions, don't worry, but please share these around if you enjoy them, and let people know. I would really love to be more of a true crime YouTuber than just a drama YouTuber, so I really, really enjoy that, and I thank you so much. Remember, like, comment, share, subscribe. Ketosis, y'all. Kita Comic. Out.